Welcome to this 10-part series about the Danish author Martinus, hosted by me, Lauge Schøler, and my co-host Karsten Jensen. The aim of this series is to provide an in-depth overview of Martinus and his work, the Third Testament. Martinus is mostly known in Scandinavia. However, there is a growing interest around the world in non-dogmatic approaches to spirituality, and as such, many non-Scandinavian speakers whom we assume will find his teachings interesting. But since most material about Martinus is in Danish, it can be a challenge for people outside of Scandinavia to know where to start or get a proper overview of the material. Over these 10 episodes, we dive into some technical detail as we try to convey some of Martinus' ideas. Martinus' work is vast and complex and takes up over 10,000 written pages, but we have picked 10 of the most central ideas to explore. We strive to make it as accessible as possible, and we hope it can provide the initial understanding of the most basic concepts that will make further study of his text more digestible. If you're interested in Martinus and his cosmology, you're welcome to visit martinus.dk for more information. In Denmark, there's an institute in Copenhagen which maintains the day-to-day administration, and there is a summer holiday center in Klint in northern Sjælland, where people interested in Martinus meet and study his works. Please enjoy. Welcome back. So this is episode 3 about karma and reincarnation.
Yeah.
And I think for a visual aid, it could be good to look up symbol number 18 at martinus.dk, where you can also see the English explanation. And if you look at that symbol, I think it will make a little more sense what we'll say now, because that symbol encompasses both karma and reincarnation and how they work together.
Yeah, and also just briefly, I'll mention that symbol number 19 and number 23, there are some of the same details that reoccur in these symbols.
Sure.
It also relates to how karma and reincarnation somehow plays into our everyday life. And also, you could say, the overall mission of karma and reincarnation.
Exactly.
But what do you think about when you think about karma and the way Martinus portrays it?
Well, the thing is that Martinus, as you mentioned, he got this initiation when he was 30 years old. And in the beginning, he could just see the principles of how the world and the universe worked, but he didn't really have the language for it. And he didn't know that many traditions before him had described similar principles and similar mechanisms, because he was not very well educated. So he was not aware that a lot of other traditions and mystics and so on have described the same thing. So in the beginning, he called it like the karma, he called it something else, and he called reincarnation as the organism replenishing principle or something like that, until he realized that people have been calling that thing reincarnation for a long while. And then he thought,
for karma, he would use the concept, the principle of retribution, I think he called it.
Yeah.
At some point, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the thing about Martinus is that he gives a scientific and very logical explanation as to how karma works, because most religions up until then, especially Buddhism and Hinduism and so on, they had hunches about how it worked and what it was and so on. But he was the first one who actually who explained it through his reasoning and his symbols and so on. And I think it's also very common in everyday parlance for most people. Like, it's like if somebody steals from you, it's like, oh, it's your karma, without really thinking it through. Like, because most people they have an idea of what you mean when you say, oh, it's your karma.
Yeah, and last time we talked about these world impulses, where
exactly.
The old impulse that were behind the Old Testament of the Bible, they had this principle of justice, an eye for an eye. And what Martinus wanted to convey in his analysis is that there is some kind of system of justice in the universe, that and also there's, I mean, we don't need to play the role of those who execute retribution, because there is some kind of inbuilt, it's like an educational system in a sense, where your actions will have a consequence.
Yeah.
And so he would sometimes refer to this place in the Bible where it's said, "Revengeance belongs to me," says the Lord.
Yeah.
And so there is a kind of retribution or vengeance, but it's not revengeance because it's not based on hatred, but it's actually, in the way Martinus sees it, a kind of loving principle. He wants to explain how actually, if we can see the whole picture, we wouldn't want to live without karma.
Exactly.
We will come to appraise it and see it as something that is beneficial for the further unfoldment of life.
Exactly. Yeah, and also I think this is one anecdote where one of his Martinus's friends said, "Well, should I go out and then punish people as a means to have their karma redeemed?" And he said, "No, don't do that. The divine providence will take care of whatever karma people needs to get. Individually, you don't have to go around and punish people and educate people, because that's not your mission. Don't worry, like the Godhead will take care of that."
Yeah. Also, at one point, he said in a meeting he had with some of his co-workers, he said, "You don't have to fight that which is evil or wrong, because eventually it will destroy itself."
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and also, it's. I think when you mention the word karma, most people, either spiritually inclined or not, they'll immediately get this image in their head about gas chambers or guns or something very violent. But he says that karma is just this principle about that everything goes in circles.
We reap what we sow.
And it can be in the big, it can be like murder, murder or rape in the most extreme sense, or it can be like small things, like people stealing small amounts of money from you, or people using slander or talking behind your back, or if you cheat on your taxes or whatever. Like every tiny little action will come back to you in some sense.
And also there's such a thing as good karma.
There's also good karma. Yeah.
All the good deeds also come back, and so it's a principle of you could say it's kind of an organic principle of action and reaction.
Exactly.
Where what Newton described in physics was a mechanical principle of action and reaction in the physical world, but Martinus sees that there is some more fundamental law which has to do with life and our spiritual existence. So it's a spiritual law.
It's a spiritual law
of action and reaction that is organic. It's not mechanic. So it's not like actually also he manages to combine it with a principle of forgiveness of our sins.
And we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, sure. But I think what inspired me was that when I read Martinus, that he explains that everything in the world, in the world and the cosmos, follows logic and follows some laws. Because, like, if you are a materialist and atheist, you could have this hunch that all that is physical and all that is visible follows laws of motion. Like the planets follow laws of motion, and you have gravity and electricity and so on. And most people can understand that there's some laws of nature that you have to follow to pass an exam in science. But he says, like, it's also the true with the spiritual aspects of life, like energies and thoughts and feelings. And if you send something out, it goes in a circle and it'll come back and hit you in the back of the head at some point. Because, and as he explained, is like, it's not like all the physical follows the laws and all the non-physical is completely random. It is like, no, everything, the physical and the non-physical follows these laws of motion where everything goes in circles. And when I finally got that, I was like, oh yeah, this is true. That must be true. It cannot be that you can just do bad things and then nothing happens. Of course it's going to come back to you. That made intuitive sense to me.
Yeah. Also, there's the kind of mood we're in will actually affect our circumstances. Yeah. So at one point he said, which may sound a little harsh to some in a sense, but he said, if you're in a good mood, you get good karma, and if you're in a bad mood, you get bad karma. So it's all about being in a good mood.
Yeah.
And I think it's because, so I said about this principle of karma, the way Martinus portrays it's not a mechanical principle, it's an organic principle. And it has to do with laws of vibration.
Exactly.
Where in the world of vibration, equal attracts equal, or like attracts like.
Sure.
I mean, there's so it's like if you have a receiver, say a TV broadcast receiver, you need your antenna to be on the same kind of frequency to as a certain broadcast to receive it, and so there's this same principle according to Martinus in life that we in our physical manifestation constitute this kind of vibrational pattern that will attract certain experiences and repulse others. And this is also why I know maybe you want to come back to it later, but it's actually why there's this principle of forgiveness of our sins. Because if you change your vibrational pattern, so say there was a time in your life you were very aggressive, and as long as you are aggressive, you will attract aggressions. But if you have a change of heart, a true change of heart, then actually your vibrational pattern will change, and you'll no longer be receptive, at least not to the same extent of these kind of aggressions that you might have expressed in an earlier stage of your personal evolution.
Exactly, and there's one lecture where he gets very technical about it, and I really love that part, where he says that if you do harmful actions towards other people, big or small, then it will create dark patches in your aura, so that we have an aura as human beings that protects us from harm, and that's way more effective than signing an insurance somewhere. That if you do good deeds and refrain from doing bad deeds, then your aura will protect you. But if you do bad things, then you have dark patches in your aura that'll make you susceptible.
Yeah, and this word aura is actually another word for what I call the vibrational pattern.
Yeah, sure, thanks. Yeah, it's actually the same thing. Yeah. And he's very keen on this idea that you are 100% responsible for your own destiny and your own actions. And that could be a very tough sell for somebody who's atheist and perhaps born handicapped, or people who have very harsh fates, people who have their children killed or whatever. If you tell that to be like, I think most people would take offense. But he says that you should take 100% responsibility for your own actions. And he says, like, if you use that as a prayer, it will actually enliven your being a bit. Say, like, I am responsible for my own fate. And I mean, I work as a psychologist, I work as a therapist, and I usually don't mention Martinus in therapy, but I think if I can somehow get this idea into people's heads that you are 100% responsible for everything that happens, even if you don't believe it technically, but you're 100% responsible. It gives you a certain attitude on life,
empowerment,
because you give a certain empowerment. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And also it's like I forgot what I wanted to say. Maybe you have some.
Sure. Yeah. But it can also be interesting that if something happens to you, it's like the universe speaking to you. And then most people, they can't believe, like, why would this happen to me? But it's like it's the universe's way of telling you, well, you can behave like that.
Yeah, I get it. And also he says that it's kind of an initiation. Sometimes, I mean, it's tests and trials very often. Yeah, when we receive these karmic patterns that we deep down are responsible for. So we are tested and we're trialed until we come to a certain place where we actually assume this responsibility fully and do not have any thoughts of retribution or anger towards those who are carriers of the message.
Exactly. Yeah.
And also you could say perhaps about Martinus's worldview that it's an antidote to feeling victimized.
Yeah, exactly.
So he wants to liberate us from this disempowering feeling of being a victim of things we cannot control.
Yeah, exactly. And it says because the worst attitude you can have is the attitude of victim mentality.
Yeah.
Because it's a complete illusion. You're not a victim of anything. You're just a result of the actions you have put out, even in previous lives. Because you can get karma from 2 or 3, 4 years, 4 lives back. That will get back to you. It's not only this life.
Yeah. So he has this thing where he says that the joy of life and martyrdom is as impossible to unite as oil and water.
Exactly.
These things simply don't go together.
Yeah. And it's about to say that it's like all the karma is like it's a refinement process. As you mentioned in the last episode, like we're all moving towards this real human kingdom where we are all complete human beings, but it's a grinding process that everybody has to go through. And in the beginning, like if you are even live in so-called primitive societies, or if you go through an atheistic phase or so on, it can all seem very arbitrary and random. And that induces a lot of anxiety. Most people, like, you can get hit by lightning anytime, or you can be stolen from anytime, or you can be killed anytime, because it seems, if you don't have the cosmic overview, life seems arbitrary and random, and you can just get cut off by the knees at any point.
Yeah, and in a sense, you could say that he's interpreting this biblical saying that you should love your enemies. Yeah. And it doesn't mean just other persons who are your enemies, but also all the bad things happening to you. And actually, he says we have to come to a place where we actually love evil. And he also qualifies that by saying we should not love evil by doing it, but understanding it as an education in what we're not supposed to do.
Exactly.
So we can love it as a necessary part of our teaching process. And I think actually a lot of people out there, if there are any listening to this, a lot of people out there will have experienced in their own life how they at certain points had some kind of hardship that were very tough when they came through it, but seen in retrospective, they will come to understand, or very often have come to understand, that it was actually a good thing that happened to me there.
Exactly. We see like people who get cancer or something, and then suddenly they don't take life for granted anymore because
or you get inspired to change certain patterns in your life and so on that actually brings you to a better place than where you were before.
Yeah.
So I guess many people will recognize that, and Martinus just takes that to another level by making it to some kind of cosmic, universal principle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and also for this principle that there are no right lines in the cosmos. Everything goes in circles, the physical and the spiritual and so on. It's all one big circular motion.
Yeah. This is also where reincarnation comes in.
Yeah,
because so in Martinus's view, there is what you call a principle of cyclicity.
Yeah.
And he says, so he mentions some everyday experiences we have that demonstrates this. So first of all, we can take our own organism. He doesn't go into that in that level of detail, but cells, for example, in cells you find a certain rhythmic pattern, some cycles going on within the cell. You have your heartbeat, you have your breath, and so on. These are also cyclical patterns, and then you have the daily cycle, and you have the annual cycle.
Yeah,
the different seasons of this annual cycle, and so he says, or his point will be that these cycles just go on for ever and ever, upwards and downwards.
Yeah.
So we live in a system of cycles within cycles.
Yeah.
And so reincarnation is part of that, because if we look at a human life, we have seasons of human life. So childhood, it's a bit like the winter season where you have the seed. It hasn't grown into a plant, and then you grow into adolescence, and then comes the more mature part of your life, which is like the summer. This is where everything is blossoming. All your talents will be unfolding, and so on. And then when you reach old age, you come into autumn, the autumn of your life, we often say, and then it becomes winter again. And what is winter? Well, it's passing beyond the physical domain into the spiritual domain, in a sense becoming a seed for a new life to unfold in physical matter.
Yeah, that's true. And it's also important to say that karma is a very automatic process. It's a completely automatic process. It's been going on forever and will go on forever. Because some people, they will think, well, karma, is it because there's some spirits sitting up there at the admin office and just doling out punishments and then administrating it? Just in like, we have this picture from Norse mythology when you have these female spirits who sit there and they pull the threads, so to speak. But that's not how it happens. It's like it's a completely automatic process. Like you send in the energy out, it comes back to you.
It's a consequence of every movement being a movement in a cycle.
Yeah,
and also there are physical cycles, but also there are cycles between different states. So like we move from childhood to adolescence, to mature age and old age.
Yeah.
These are different states, but these states also move in cycles. So there are cycles both in space, but also in the time domain, you could say.
Yeah. Yeah, and also, you can say like it's usually a question people have is like, if I kill a lot of people, I'll get killed back and so on. And usually people ask, so what about Hitler or Genghis Khan and so on? Are they going to be killed 6 million times over because they caused so much death? And he says like, no, usually those figures are like, they are special cases. They're more like with negative or dark world redeemers who were initiating bad karma on behalf of whole groups of people. But usually it's like, you send the energy out and then it comes back to you.
Yeah, but so it's back to this principle of forgiveness of our sins. We only get the karma until we have learned the lesson, so to speak.
Yeah.
And also we actually need the extra karma because these cycles also exist in larger scales. Exactly. So there's something Martinus called the spiral cycle, which we'll come into in more detail on later occasions. But we could just briefly mention it. It's an evolutionary cycle. It's going so we early on we mentioned involution, where you have this pattern where you move towards becoming one with matter and becoming totally individualized. Yeah. And then moving back towards communion and oneness with other beings. Yeah. And so we have this involutionary and evolutionary pattern, and that is in itself a cycle that we move through. And this is also where karma and reincarnation kind of connects. Sure. Because we get karma and we bring our experiences into the spiritual world and use them there to kind of plan, in a sense, our future existence and our future learning processes. And then we can come back into incarnation, physical incarnation again. Sure. And also one thing that Martinus is very explicit about is the fact we can actually only learn something new in the physical world. Exactly. It's because the physical world is the training ground. That's where you get you reap the consequences of what you do. Exactly. And also in the physical world, there's resistance to our thoughts and ideas. So when we're in the spiritual state, everything that we think, it's like if you sit down, you close your eyes and suddenly you're in this world of ideas and thoughts, and in your thoughts, everything that you think is actually happening, but it's only happening in your thoughts. Yeah. But in physical life, there's this strong resistance that we have to overcome. Exactly. And we can only overcome that by learning the laws of matter, of the physical world, and using intelligence, and also when we talk about morality, feeling to overcome resistance in the physical world.
Exactly, because that's the point, because in the spiritual world, there's no resistance and there's no consequence. And it's because most people think, well, if you just want paradise forever, why don't we just stay in the spiritual domain forever? It's just like, yeah, because there's a principle of hunger and saturation, because it would become incredibly boring if we just stayed in the spiritual world forever. So we need to get back in, as you mentioned, involution into the matter to get to kind of restart the cycle. And this is where in the physical world you get these, you have the consequences, because you have to struggle against the environment and other people, and that's where you get karma. So you can get repurified, so to speak, and then leave the cycle again once more later.
Yeah, and he describes this the state in the spiritual world. It's like a kind of vacation. So I guess many people also have the experience that if you go on vacation and you have plenty of time, at some time you'll get bored.
Exactly.
On vacation, you'll actually start longing. I mean, children, for example, they have a very long school holiday, and in the end of that school holiday, they'll actually start longing back to school again.
Exactly. Yeah.
And this is kind of the same principle you see cosmically here.
Yeah.
That we can take these breaks from all the hassle and kind of reap the fruits of all the good deeds that we've come to do.
Yeah.
So he also describes how when we move from physical to spiritual.
Yeah.
There's this purgatory.
Yeah.
Where we will have to be purified or purged in a way where we kind of leave all the imperfections that we still carry with us in our being behind, to enter into some kind of paradisical state.
Sure.
Where we each, according to our own interest, will. So if, for example, you are a hunter or a fisherman, you will come into a spiritual domain where your wildest dream about trophies and so on will come true.
Exactly.
And if you're an artist, you enter into another kind of spiritual domain where you find ways to express yourself artistically in ways you have never dreamed about.
Yeah, exactly.
And so this is so also there's I mean, we can. It's very different what different people will experience in the spiritual state, because it all depends on the kind of talents and interests they have.
Exactly, yeah. But you also mentioned this core concept of absolution of sin, which is like you only get karma back to the degree that you need to learn a lesson, because it's all about development in the physical realm. It's all about developing your feeling through suffering, which is just karma coming back and biting you, and developing intellect through dealing with matter. And so he gives an example that if you have killed 100 people in previous lives, you don't need to be killed again 100 times by other people. You just need to be killed enough time until you get the point that it actually hurts to get killed.
Yeah, when you feel in yourself, if you feel in yourself contemplating killing another person, how it would actually feel in that situation, when you can sense that, because this is the effect of suffering and having certain experiences, that you build up this capacity for compassion and pity for other beings. And there is no other way, according to Martinus, that we can build up this capacity than by experiencing the consequences of our own actions.
Exactly. Yeah. And you mentioned that there's three main areas that we create karma for ourselves. It's how we deal with other people. And again, it can be everything from genocide to lying, or it's how we deal with animals, whether you're vegetarian or not, I think plays a huge role. And then how you deal with your own body and your own micro beings. And we'll get into that in a later episode, how you deal with your own physical organism. And that's the main areas in which you can create karma. If you treat other people poorly, if you treat animals poorly, if you treat your own body poorly through alcohol, for instance, then it will get back to you at some point.
And even the burial, how we manage that will have a a consequence. And also, I mean, something that Martinus felt strongly for was this the way we treat the animals, not just by eating them, but also in the kind of processing they're submitted to in before they are eaten. That will have negative consequences for us. And here he becomes quite concrete, because he talks about how, for example, if you're in an accident, that will typically be karma for eating animals, because he says when we kill the animals, it's not revenge, it's not aggression.
Yeah.
It's kind of unsentimental.
Yeah.
And so the way the karma comes back is that we were also killed in a rather accidental
manner.
manner.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But he also says that you should still protect yourself. You should still take responsibility for yourself. Because he says you can't just, if you are a good person who doesn't hurt other people, it doesn't mean you can just do whatever you want. He says, like, still, use a helmet if you ride on a bicycle, and don't go into the jungle if there are wild animals there, because they will eat you.
Yeah, so he says something like, if you love something that is unpleasant, you don't have to be in contact with. You can still love it without being in contact with it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and he says, there's one of his key ideas: don't kill the messenger. If somebody is mean to you, in quotation marks, then it's like, with your physical eyes, it might look as if a random person is just coming and doing arbitrary evil towards you. But actually, it's the karmic cycle coming back to you. And it says the impulse that we have from the animal kingdom, which we're about to leave the animal kingdom, that's self-protection. And that means whoever is trespassing on you, you have to strike back. But he says that whole idea of self-defense, in quotation mark, is an illusion, because so-called self-defense is just an excuse to restart the karmic cycle all over.
Yeah.
So if you don't engage in re-aggression and self-defense, if you just take the hit, so to speak, and just move on with your life, you take a conscious choice not to restart the cycle of karma.
Yeah, and we can use the phrase from the Lord's Prayer: forgive our trespasses as we forgive those who trespasses on us.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's usually what confuses people, because most people who don't have cosmic consciousness, they kind of, I think, intuitively get the idea of like micro karma in small loops. Like if you are like a real annoying person, if you are evil, then if you treat people badly, other people will treat you badly. But sometimes I think these karmic loops can be so long. If something hits you from like 3 incarnations ago, most people get very confused, like, why would that happen to me? Yeah, it's because like 3-4 incarnations ago, you might have, been part of a gang that has done something, or you have been committed genocide against somebody, or like been being completely unconscious about it. You didn't know it was wrong. And then
you haven't developed the capacity for receiving this karma
exactly
in a way that kind of disarms it. So you will actually, you talk about a talent for reception of karma.
Exactly.
And this is what we have to liberate ourselves from karma. It's in particular bad karma, because nobody wants to liberate themselves from good karma. But to liberate yourself from bad karma, you have to develop this talent for the reception of karma, how you approach it when you encounter something that is unpleasant. And as I said before, what he's unfolding here is this message from the Christ about loving your enemies.
And turn your other cheek.
Turn your other cheek, which he interprets in the way that you should, what is bad karma? Well, it's people behaving like animals. And what you should show them is your humane side. So turning the other cheek means, in Martinus' view, showing the other side of your character.
Yeah.
So they meet you with some kind of animal behavior, behavior that is rooted in the traditions of the animal kingdom. And the best way to receive it and to be receptive of it is to show them your humane side. And this will eventually disarm all the bad things in Martinus' view.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but also thinking that most people, they get, as I mentioned in the beginning, that like they come to think of the most extreme examples, like people who perished in the Holocaust and so on. It's like, how could all these good men and women and children, be stuffed into gas chambers and killed in the most gruesome way? It's like, yeah, because in that isolated incident, it might look extremely cruel and extremely meaningless. But if you look at the big picture, then that particular instance might be an accumulation of karma for maybe 10 lives.
But also he mentions eating meat there.
Yeah,
because of the way it's done. Because it's like cattle going to the slaughterhouse.
Exactly.
So you're just in these concentration camps, you were just treated like animals brought to the slaughterhouse.
Exactly.
And there was no aggression.
Yeah.
It's systematic, like a factory.
Yeah.
There were not people yelling at you. On the contrary, you had people playing classical music to calm everyone down and so on.
Yeah.
And just have things happened automatically with nobody really knowing what was going to happen. Yeah. So actually, I heard one lecture where he mentions that this could be karma simply for eating meat.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it could be an important thing is to stress that it happens to everybody. Everybody has to go through the same quantum of karma. But it can look a bit asymmetric because some people, they have good lives now and some people, they have bad lives. But in the end, we all have to go through the darkness because we're going through the darkness and then we have to pop out at the other end.
And also he talks about how it can be, the concentration camps, it could be karma for slaughtering animals ritually as part of a religious practice, which is still common in some...
some parts of the world.
Some parts of the world,
Yeah, and I guess that leads us into the topic of reincarnation, which is very tightly linked to the concept of karma.
Yeah, we already touched some upon it.
We talked a bit about it, yeah. But I think, as I mentioned in the first episode, is that one of the things that made Martinus appealing to me, in contrast to so-called classical Christianity, which is fine in most respects, but the question of why do bad things happen to good people? I think both in Catholicism and Protestantism and so on, I see all these priests and bishops and so on, and theologians, they're tying themselves in knots, trying to explain why do bad things happen to good people, or why do good things happen to bad people? You can't get around it. If you don't have the idea of both karma and reincarnation, you just can't explain it. Not in a way that makes sense to me, at least. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Martinus felt very strongly that was part of his mission, actually to make some sense out of the ideas, the sayings of the Christ. For example, why is it logical to love your enemies, as we've mentioned several times now? Well, it's because that eventually whatever you do, no matter if you do it to protect yourself, it will come back to you. Yeah. So he's trying to describe the universe in a way that actually makes the behavior of the Christ as logical as it possibly can be. And also he's criticizing in a sense that he's analyzing it as an imperfection, that you have this idea that the Christ sacrificed himself for the sake of our sins, which is, I think most people who go to churches today also really have to tie some knots around themselves to understand the logic. I mean, why would a God sacrifice his own son, or why would he need a sacrifice to forgive sins? I don't think many people today, at least if they're kind of progressive, could associate themselves with such an image of the Godhead.
Yeah, it's also like, why did bad things continue to happen after the death of Christ if he just solved everything by sacrificing himself? Yeah.
They explain it by saying that we do not believe in the Christ, but that just doesn't make sense. So Martinus, he wants to kind of explain the logic behind why should we forgive other people not only 7 times, but 7 times 7 times, or 7 times 70 times, or how many times? I mean, it's basically what it means is that we should do it every time. No matter what people are doing, we should forgive them. We should never act out of revenge, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't protect ourselves, but we should protect ourselves by being smart. And
just walk away if you can.
Yeah, I mean, there are many different ways we can be smart. So one thing is walking away, but also saying the right things in certain situations to kind of disarm the situation and bring tensions down and so on.
Exactly.
So this is also about showing the humane side, is also being smart about what is happening. And of course, also sometimes we need things like police and policing to protect people in general. And Martinus wasn't against that. On the contrary, just thought that it shouldn't be an act of retribution.
Exactly.
It shouldn't be an act of aggression towards those those beings who are kind of the messengers, carrier of our own karma. So it's part of this capacity to receive karma in the right way that we protect ourselves, also sometimes with the help of police and policing and so on.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and it's also with karma, it goes to the same thing with reincarnation, that a lot of traditions, not Christianity, but like Hinduism and Buddhism and so on, they had hunches about reincarnation being a concept. But Martinus, I think he could see it more clearly, because he said, because people would ask him, so have I been a crocodile or a worm in my past life? And he's like, no, that's not how it works. Your physical organism looks almost the same from life to life. And then slowly, through a gradual process of many, many incarnations, it will be more purified. So we go from the monkey stage and the animal stage, and then slowly we developed, to become what we are now. But we can't just suddenly turn into a cow in our next life and so on. That's not how it works.
No. We do not move backwards in evolution. That's part of Martinus's analysis. It's always a progressive movement towards greater perfection.
And as I see also, I think if you have this cosmic consciousness, as I mentioned in the first episode, you get this cosmic X-ray vision, and you can see how everything it works. And I think if you have this X-ray vision, you could look at the planet or the galaxy and so on, and then you can see all these beings that are eternal in nature, and you can see them popping in and out of the physical dimension. They go to spiritual dimension, they go to physical dimension, spiritual dimension, physical dimension, pop in and out of these back and forth. And then slowly they go through this purifying process.
And also, I mean, so this is how Martinus saw it, and of course, we can develop that intuition as well. But a precursor or a precondition is that we develop the ability to love all things. All aspects of life must be enveloped in our compassion and our love for intuition to be awakened in us. And he also talks about, it does, again, as I mentioned before, it doesn't mean that you should be what he calls kind of stupid good.
Like foolishly good.
Foolishly. You shouldn't be foolishly good because you should still be smart. So you'll talk about the feeling and the compassion we have towards other beings. It needs to be intellectualized. We need to be smart about it. We need to know and be able to analyze when something is actually helpful or the opposite, and whether it's in a certain situation beneficial to do something to us. Because also very often, if we are foolishly good, it actually means that we turn people into victims, which is not a help. So in the Bible, for example, there is this disabled person where the Christ says to him, take your bed and walk. And that sounds like a miracle, but it could actually be the Christ saying, to this person, you can actually do this yourself. You can actually stand up and take your bed and walk.
Yeah.
And I think there is something in Martinus that points in that direction, that the best help we can do to others is not victimizing them. It's rather somehow empowering them and help them to see that the kind of abilities they have to manage their own situation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's also important to say that we are internal beings. And I think it took me, I think it was only on my second read-through of Martinus's work that it really dawned on me, it just clicked for me that we have always been here, we'll always be here. And our being, the I that I am and the you that you are, it has always been here. And the same goes for like the planet and the solar system and the galaxy and so on. They and all the micro beings that constitute our bodies, these are internal beings that keep popping in and out of the physical realm and go back to the spiritual realm.
Yeah, and we'll come back to that because to really understand this, we have to go into what you could call Martinus's anthropology and also his understanding of the living being in general.
Yeah.
How we have these different dimensions of our being.
Yeah.
So in the first episode, we mentioned how he had this golden baptism of fire, where he was in this ocean of golden light, and felt one with God and all other beings, and how he later on conveyed to us that we actually all have this divine essence in our being. So this is the eternal part, but we also, of course, has a temporal part. So all that we experience is movement and motion and process, and everything is changing and everything is vanishing over time or becoming something else. So in our experience, this is what happens. But we couldn't experience all these motions, all these processes, if there wasn't something, a kind of contrast in our being that is not process. That simply is. So he would sometimes talk about it as an unnameable something that is. Something we cannot conceive of it, we cannot perceive it, but without it, we couldn't perceive or conceive of anything. So everything we think of or perceive is motion, but we need this eternal part at the core to actually experience these motions.
That's true. Yeah, and also say that the whole this reincarnation business is only part of that, of the big cosmic cycle where we actually in the physical matter. And again, that it could be a good visual aid to look at symbol 11 to see that part of the cycle which is physical, which is the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the first part of the real human kingdom. And that's where you have this reincarnation cycle where you pop in on life, pop out of life, pop in of life, out of life. And then in the rest of the cycle, you are continuously only in the spiritual realm. There's no reincarnation when you are in the spiritual part of the
reincarnation in that part will be thoughts and ideas,
exactly,
and kind of artistic expressions and so on. And they will, so an incarnation will only last for moments, and then it will be replaced by something else. But you mentioned the seasons before, that when you are tired after long life, maybe you live until you're 80, 90, 100 years old, and your body has kind of withered away, then it needs to be replenished. Because, and he says reincarnation and sleep is almost the same principle. Because if you have a long day, you've been productive and you've been doing great things, maybe a rough day or a good day or whatever, then you're very tired. Your nervous system is kind of frayed in the end. You are very exhausted. Then you go to sleep, and then you go to the spiritual world in your sleep if you have a proper sleep. And then you are rejuvenated and you come back. And the main difference is that normally if you just go to sleep and you wake up the next day, you can remember what you did the last time. Whereas in terms of reincarnation, you had a long life, and in your body, you can see it like physically on people. They look very fresh when they are young, and then you look more tired and
exhausted when you're an old man and old woman.
Become satiated with being all the resistance of the physical world. I mean,
exactly.
It becomes tiresome just to stand up.
Yeah.
So you just want to, if you live long enough, you just want to lie down
exactly.
and go into sleep and eventually just glide into the spiritual world.
Exactly. And he says like, and then you have as a rule of thumb, yes, and it's a very general rule. It says like, he mentioned that you spend almost as much time in the spiritual world between incarnations as you do in the physical world. So if you only had a short life of like 10 years and you die for whatever reason, then you spend just a short amount of time in the spiritual world and you come back very quickly, so you can reincarnate quickly again. Whereas if you've been living for 100 years in the physical world, it takes a long time in the spiritual world to rejuvenate and to recharge the batteries, so to speak.
Also, we should mention that there are actually also some karmic cycles going from discarnation to discarnation.
Yeah, that's what it gets really technical. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the way I understand it is that Martinus will talk about us having an overview of, say, the last 2 or 3 last lives when we come into the discarnated state.
Yeah.
And so we will be able to have this overview and see a larger picture and use that in planning our future experiences. So there's a kind of continuity, when we move from life to life, and the way we envision how we can develop further in our next life, what kind of challenges we need and the lessons of life.
Exactly. Yeah. So because the karma carries over. So you need to like be mindful about in between your lives, how can I live my next life properly so I can develop as best as I can. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also like, and then people sometimes ask, well, how does it happen? You know, how do I get into this world? And he says like, it's about the sexual union between usually a man and a woman. And then if they have a sexual union, then they send out a wavelength.
It's a vibrational pattern again.
Exactly. It's a vibrational pattern that then joins up with a discarnated soul that is now longing to come back to the physical world. And then because it's by no means random who your parents are and which part of the world you're incarnating into.
It's not random, but it's not mechanical either, because it has to do with interests and desires and so on.
Exactly. And that's what some people think, like, why did I get these parents? Well, I suppose like it was the wavelengths.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And also, there's one more thing I was thinking about. Just slipped my tongue. Yeah, maybe we've said enough about reincarnation.
Yeah, I think it's just one more point about that. And there's this common objection that people usually have and says like, well, I can't remember anything from any past life, so why would it be true? Where he mentions that, well, we have a sort of amnesia for details about what we did in the past lives. But the point of that is that, first of all, that we should experience this particular stretch of the evolution as a kind of separation from God and the isolation. So if you could remember anything, then we wouldn't have this illusion of separation. But also that if we could remember everything that happened to us previous lives, we would get so overwhelmed because our working memory would be completely cluttered with stuff from previous lives. And we would also have PTSD because we would be so traumatized from all the stuff we had been through in the past many lives.
And also it has to do with how memory becomes less and less a factor of our life as we move into this state that he calls the perfected human being.
Exactly.
And this also has to do with the fact that as we move forward in evolution, so at the more what you call primitive stage or the earlier states of evolution, a lot of things are happening automatically. We are not conscious participants. So when we talk about planning your next life, that's on a rather advanced stage where you have well-developed intellectuality.
Yeah.
So as we progress and comes nearer towards this perfected human state, we become more and more conscious participants in the whole process of incarnation.
Exactly. That's true. Yeah, and it's like what we carry over from previous lives is not memory, but it's more like talents and morals. So usually people if you don't have the cosmic overview, it can be very confusing as to why are some people extremely talented at something like sports or music or politics or whatever it is, and some people seem to have almost no talent. And there's huge discrepancy in IQ, for instance, which is kind of a taboo that if you just scratch a little bit beneath the surface, it's very obvious that some people are much smarter than some other people, but it's very difficult to explain why is that the case, right? And then we don't have to go too much into it, but he talks about this idea of talent kernels, that you build up talents through a couple of incarnations, that you get really good at something. He mentioned one time that it takes like 3 incarnations of deliberate practice to become a virtuoso on the piano, for instance. Yeah.
That's a good thing, because that can actually encourage you to, even though you're not a genius, to keep on practicing, because it might not happen in this lifetime, but if you're really interested and you really desire to become a better musician, eventually it will happen and you will become a virtuoso. So this is, again, it has to do with the kind of note we started on, this thing about consequence. We talked about that there is a kind of consequence of justice. It's like nothing. So Martinus was often saying the saying that goes back to the ancient Greeks: nothing comes from nothing. And this is, you could say, also one of the benefits of his worldview is that it kind of describes how everything has a cause, and there is justice in all these inequalities that we can observe.
Exactly.
Martinus would often say about himself that what I am, everybody will become or have been.
Also, like, so you can't really get lost in this, like in this whole system.
No, there's a universal redemption here.
Universal redemption, and the whole point of it is to make that complete human being that we all moving towards, which is like the proper and fun state of how to be in the universe.
So all will be well, as Martinus said, and as it says in the Bible.
Okay. Should we wrap it up here?
Let's do that.
Let's do that.